Okay, hello there everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration Web Seminar. It's great to have you all with us. My name is Kurt Ozzie-Durley. I'm the webinar editor here at DA, and I'll be your host. The title of our event, as you see here, is Secure Access for All, Minimize Cybersecurity Risks in a Remote World. It is being brought to you through the generous support of our sponsor for today, Amazon Web Services. First off, as members of our audience are still coming in here, a bit of background about our topic for today. According to recent cyber reports, the number of phishing incidents or attacks hitting homes has more than doubled since the national quarantine. School districts had to quickly react and implement a strategy which would allow every student and employee the ability to access district resources remotely. While the quick reaction was necessary, there just wasn't enough time to adequately plan and account for proper cybersecurity best practices. Today we'll be discussing some of these issues, and we'll learn how Houston ISD leveraged Amazon's AppStream 2.0 cloud-based solution to quickly respond to the crisis, while at the same time minimizing the cybersecurity risks associated with making an entire school district from students to staff remote. We're looking forward to an interesting presentation and discussion here, plus live Q&A. We welcome your questions, so do stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a minute or two here. First off, though, just some quick housekeeping notes. First, as it says here, for tech support, if you need it at any time during our presentation here, you can use the chat panel at the right side of your screen. Just select the name of our event host and producer, Jason York. Let him know if you're having any issues. He'll be able to help you out there. Also, second item here, as it says, if you have any audio trouble at any time, we will also post the phone number and access code that you can use in that chat box at the right side of your screen there. You can dial those numbers at any time to get audio access over the phone if you need it. Also, third item here, as I said earlier, we welcome your questions. You can feel free to use the Q&A, the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. Just make sure it's set to all panelists, like it says on the slide. That's the default option. Feel free to ask a question at any time as we're going here. Again, just type it in that Q&A, bottom right-hand corner, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. So once again, type in your question at any time in that Q&A, the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll get to those at the end. Also, speaking of questions, last item on the slide here, we are commonly asked about accessing the presentation at a later time. And yes, just so everyone knows, everyone who registered or attended here today will be receiving a follow-up email with links to where you can find the slides, as well as the recording. We are recording here, and it'll be archived on the DA site. So you'll be able to go back over it, go back over the presentation, or if you want to share with any of your colleagues, anyone on your team at your district, you'll be able to do that later on. So don't worry about that. Okay, so with that, we'll go on to our program here today. Just to introduce our panel quickly, we're very fortunate to have with us Scott Gilhousen is Chief Information Officer at Houston ISD. Lenny Shad is Chief Information and Innovation Officer here at District Administration. And we're also joined by Chad Stevens. He's the leader of K-12 education for Amazon Web Services. Lenny Shad is going to start us off and serve as our moderator for our discussion here. So at this point, I'll turn it over to him, to Lenny and Scott and Chad. It's great to have you all with us. Welcome to our webinar.
Well, perfect. Thank you very much, and good day to everybody. Happy Thursday. It's a pleasure to be here with you and have a conversation that I know is top of mind for all of us. And the two gentlemen I have the pleasure of speaking with today, I've known for many years, very much respected, and I know that they're going to provide a lot of really good insight. Quickly, a little bit of background about me. I've been in the K-12 space since 2003. Worked for two large school systems in the Houston area for 17 years, and just recently moved over to district administration, where I'm helping work with superintendents and academic officers and technology leaders to really think through more strategically about how to leverage technology. And so what I'd like to do is quickly have Scott and Chad just give a brief intro and a little bit of background about themselves, and we're going to move into the meat of the program. So Scott, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Lenny. Again, my name is Scott Gelhausen. I'm the current Chief Information Officer for the Houston Independent School District. I'm very proud and privileged to be able to serve the district for the last 20 years. Definitely have seen a lot of change evolve inside of our district. I've been in various infrastructure roles from that standpoint, and I've been the Chief Information Officer for the district for the last year and a half.
All right, thank you, Scott. Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, thanks, Lenny. Hey, Dr. Chad Stevens, I'm our leader for K-12 education at AWS. I had a 14-year career as a teacher, principal, and chief technology officer in schools prior to joining private sector about 10 years ago. Came over to AWS about 4.5 years ago to start the K-12 practice and get that off the ground. And so I'm really excited to talk to you. Also, current board member for COSIN.
Awesome, Chad. Thanks for that. And gentlemen, let's get into the meat of this. So I want to kind of set the tone for our discussion. And, you know, in March, every district had to quickly migrate all of their functions to a remote environment. And no matter if you were prepared, if you were ready or not, you were thrown into this virtually in the matter of days. And this firefighting mode, while it's necessary, we all know that's not the position as leaders of a technology system where we want to spend our time. But that was March, and you know, we had to focus on what do we do to now keep the operations and the education moving ahead with a remote workforce. And unfortunately, those discussions and making that happen involves people, processes, and technology. And because we were in firefighter mode, we had to react quickly. And again, it didn't have anything to do with what our current state was or what we want our current state to be. We basically had to live with where we were at and implement solutions quickly. And in doing so, there were probably a lot of gaps and a lot of things that now, having more time, you have an opportunity to go back and think through. So the transition was quick, and as was mentioned in the intro, cybersecurity at the homes is going through the roof because everybody knows now that we're working from home and we're going to continue to work from home. So the security gaps have emerged, and now what we have to do is, as we think about start of school, I think our parents were very accommodating and understanding in March because thrown into this chaos. I think our communities are expecting to see some improvement when school comes around. So the question is, what are you doing to say, here's where we're better than we were in March? Maybe that we haven't solved everything, but that we're better than we were in March. What we found in March is because we were in firefighter mode, we had to push change. And every course you go to about organizational change management will tell you pushing change doesn't work. You need to instead help get the organization ready for the change. And as I said, in March, we didn't have a choice. We had to push the change. But now as we start to think through start of school and beyond, what is it in your organization that you're doing to move away from pushing change and helping the organization get ready for change? Because this situation we're in, and this fact of remote learning, is not going to go away. It's not like a crisis like a hurricane or a tornado or a fire where it's a point in time and we're going to rubber band back to the way we were doing it before. This is our new normal. And so how are you getting the organization ready to change? And so that's why I'm so excited about the conversation today, because this moves us from firefighter mode, helps us understand how we're going to get the organization ready for change. So if you think about start of school and the various scenarios that districts are facing, kids who are going to be face-to-face. We've got kids who are going to be at home. We have kids who are, our districts who are saying we're going to start off virtual. These scenarios add an incredible amount of complexity to how schools are going to operate. We have devices that we've now got to get in our hands. We've got scheduling for remote kids, hybrid kids, face-to-face kids that are challenging our SIS system. How are we going to keep sanitation and cleanliness around for our school systems? What is the workforce availability? We have employees who are going to be high risk, who can't come face-to-face. How are we going to deal when we have an incident in our central administration building or at a campus? What's the reaction going to be, and how are you going to quickly pivot? And then ultimately, you know, the big concern is, what are we going to do from a cybersecurity perspective? And, you know, you're hearing metaphors gone wild: uncharted territory, breaking new ground, outside of the box, breaking the rules. What all of these boil down to is we are in the midst of very disruptive change, disruptive to the degree that we've never seen before. So again, as a school leader, what are you doing to help your organization navigate their way through this disruptive change? And part of that is expectation management, right? And expectation is a belief about what's going to happen in the future. And these beliefs are what guide the behavior of your employees. So as you're sitting here thinking about start of school, whether it's your community or just your department in itself, are you setting the expectation, or are you letting others set the expectation for you? Because if you're letting others set the expectation for you, I guarantee you they are going to have higher expectations than what you know is the reality of what you could accomplish in the frame between March and start of school. So as you're listening to the context of these gentlemen and they're sharing their knowledge, be thinking about how you can help your organization get ready for change, how you're going to help them set an expectation that is realistic, and as a leader, what are you doing to drive both of those things? Scott, before we get started, I'd like you to just give them a little bit of background on what HISD is.
Sure. Currently today, we're made up of about 283 schools with the traditional elementary, middle, and high. We do have some high schools that are, or middle and high schools that are combined, 6 through 12. We also have some K through 8s. In one particular, we've got a K through 12, but we're one of the largest districts in the state of Texas and the largest employer in the city of Houston, 7th largest in the nation. We have about 209,000, roughly right now, about 209,500 students that speak well over 100 different languages. About 80% of our population is economically disadvantaged. And one of the things that is part of that change that we've been able to do for the last 7 years, we've had a pretty robust Power Up program in our high schools, where we provided a laptop device for every student in our high school communities. And on top of that, as part of a partnership with the Sprint 1 Million program, we were able to outfit, I'm going to say roughly about 90% of our students with broadband access for that. When we start to talk about some of the other challenges that we're going to have inside the district, our elementary and our middle schools were not as mature in adopting a one-to-one environment. A lot of that was funding, a lot of that was cost associated with that. So they're more of a 4-to-1 or a 3-to-1 in those scenarios. So just kind of wanted to give a little bit of background of just kind of the size and scale of what we had to deal with. So as we move through some of the other slides, you guys will have a pretty good picture of just the vast enormity of things that we had to do within our environment and the amount of change that we had to do.
All right, thank you, Scott. All right, so as I mentioned, overnight, every organization, public and private, had to implement a solution that would allow their employees to work from home. This was the district employees, these were students, these were teachers. So Chad, as you think about this reality and the fact that they had to pivot so quickly, how does AppStream help address these challenges for districts that are thinking about having to continue this mode of remote learning as they look at the start of school?
Yeah, thanks, Lenny. You know, I think kind of what we saw from a broad point of view, looking at the U.S. is remote learning kind of spread across really rapidly with AppStream, was that traditionally a lot of the tools that kids needed, students needed, were really locked in the school, if you will, in a computer lab. So we were able to get a lot of the remote learning going outside of the school, and then we realized, well, wait a minute, like these kids need access to engineering software, these kids need access to SolidWorks, these kids need things to keep that learning going. And one of the things that we saw, was how critical that was to keep student engagement. So we saw many of our customers, including Houston, and I'll let Scott talk a little bit more detail about how they did that, move to this solution because it's on demand, it's as you go, it's fully managed, things can happen very quickly. I think the other thing that we saw also with all of our end user computing at AWS was this concept that it's really hard to scale your VPN enough, especially when you think about Scott's situation with that many students, that many employees, for that capacity too. And so there was a security nature of either these AppStream 2.0 for students or even our Amazon workspaces for employees. So, I think customers tell the story better, so I'll hand it over to Scott and you talk a little bit about his thoughts there.
Yeah, and Chad, I think it's a really important point in that it's more than just giving an internet connection to students and to teachers. The challenge here is how do we continue and make available the robust infrastructure and resources that will enable the kids to continue their instruction and their growth. So it goes way beyond just providing that remote link in. So Scott, as you thought about this, grappling with how do you overnight make available these resources to students and staff, and we can't forget that there's a business side to a school system. So while the students are the top priority, there's also a business element to providing functionality for an ongoing basis. What were some of the points of concern you had when deciding what solutions to put in place?
Yeah, so when we take a look at this, when we were in that March timeframe, I remember getting the call right before spring break. It was Friday the 13th, and we were going to have to plan for about 2 weeks once we come back from spring break. We'd anticipated that we were going to be able to do some sort of remote instruction and remote access at a very light capacity for those 2 weeks. So we didn't see that impending tidal wave right away because we were working from that notion that we would be back into our facilities or our campuses within that time frame. But as we started getting more indications of that we were not going to be coming back for that month of April and possibly moving into May, we started to see how we were vulnerable in so many different ways, and it presented some unique challenges for us. When you start to think about a very large and diverse workforce that was moving from site-based to a remote workforce instantaneously overnight, you're talking about transitioning about 30,000 employees. And in addition, you've got contractors that are working remotely from home. They're also working from across the globe. So we have some of our contractors that are working in Asia at this moment. Some of them are working in Europe that needed access to our systems. We had various departments that were impacted by this, right? We had professional development for teachers. We had student application access. We had the legacy applications that had different thick clients out there. We had a lot of paper-based workflows that just didn't work anymore in a remote environment. We had a hybrid technology environment where we had access to cloud applications, and then there were also on-premise applications. So you have your traditional applications such as Google Apps for Education, Office 365. We use It's Learning for our LMS environment. We use Renaissance Learning for our assessments. We have recruiting apps that we use from an HR standpoint, which are all in the cloud, which work very effectively for people that work remotely. But then when we start to look at our legacy applications that were on-premise, our entire financial system is within the data center. Our HR system is in the data center. Our transportation, our nutrition services, our legacy student information system. We had a lot of file shares that were still in the environment. We had on-premise SharePoint, telephony access, a lot of CT applications that were there as well. In the midst of it, we were implementing a new student information system. So we had been on an SIS system to the state for about 13 years, and we are going live in the fall of 2020 of implementing a brand new SIS system, and most of the development, I'll say about 3/4 of the custom development, is done by 3 different development teams that were working remotely and on site. A lot of that has to deal with application custom development. A lot of it has to do with report building. There was a lot of plans and training a very large population of teachers, roughly about 12,000 teachers physically on site. We had to start considering and doing remote virtual sessions. And when you started to look at things inside your organization, I think most of you guys can attest to is the procurement life cycle. When you have to go start getting funding, quotes, contracts, you start looking at hardware proposals, you start looking at delivery, implementation times, that could be a 6 to 8 week kind of timeline right after you get a board approval. So implementing some of those technologies may not be quick or fast. And then the final one for us was we needed to see what that digital experience looked like for teachers, staff, students, and we wanted to find something that was fluid, consistent, very responsive for the users, because they were using different types of technologies, whether it was an iPad, a Chromebook, whether it was using a PC that was district provided, or some of their own home equipment. So definitely a lot of complexities that we were having to think through as we started looking at remote solutions.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, all of those challenges that you were just identifying. I think the thing for our audience is every district out there faced the same challenges, right? So it's just a matter of scale. And I think what's interesting is an application like this allows you to provide just-in-time resourcing to address the issue quickly, but doing it in a way that's very economical. And so I think for everybody that's listening, you know, you all struggled with the same kind of things. And so when you think about how do you get an organization ready and how do you manage expectations, these are the things that I think are really important as you look beyond start of school. So, you know, being an IT guy, all of us are on this call, or IT people or very structured and process oriented. One of the things that I always struggled with firefighter mode is there was never really adequate time to plan and test and phase and, you know, look for how we want to do this right. We had to react very quickly. Now we have a little bit of time before start of school, but still there's not that really time allotment that we all want. So Scott, when you did go to this remote solution and put it in place for every employee, what were the considerations that were top of mind for you regarding the safety of your staff and the safety of the infrastructure that you have in place when you start to open up this whole remote world?
Sure, Lenny. So one of the things that we had to start taking into consideration, and when we talk about, you know, being able to plan, you know, a lot of that is what, you know, is traditional brick and mortar IT organizations. We didn't have that capacity anymore, and we had to move very quickly. Not only just because we were coming up with solutions, but I'll say, and a lot of you could probably experience this, IT as an organization automatically started to move to the front of the organization in the different types of requests that were coming in. So the demand management that was coming in from your superintendent, your board, your cabinet, your various different tiers within the organization, whether that's academics, schools office, communications, risk management, finance, operations, all of those started to pull on those threads of IT. So we had to move very quickly in providing and offering the solutions. We knew we were moving into a closeout of a budget year. There was quite a bit of funding that was still left inside the campus's budgets that they were looking to procure devices. They were looking to procure other technologies that would enhance and support those students. They were looking to procure things that they did not necessarily have access to as they were going through the post-spring break time period. And so we had to take a look at what our current state looked like when we were looking for a remote access solution. And we had a Cisco VPN that we gave a very limited amount of access to. So that was our principal staff and our administrative staff that predominantly got access to that, and then the back-end IT group. We had a Cisco WebSSL solution as well that gave teachers access to our student information system, but it was very limited in the various other applications that were needed. We had VDI, virtual desktop interface, for our contractors. When we really started looking at the current state, none of these solutions would scale or meet any of the security needs, especially when you're talking about enabling a workforce of about 30,000 people to have some sort of remote access from that standpoint. So we started evaluating solutions out there. And we already had another provider inside the environment, so we started to look for that. That was Fortinet, and seeing if they could offer a solution. In what we're doing, we looked at jump boxes, we looked at direct, natting, we looked at, if we started to enable remote desktop, all again, very bad solutions when you start looking at a remote workforce, because they, exposed through some sort of vulnerable attack surface. They give you limited direct control over what a specific user or student can do. When you start to look at these solutions, you design the security around it when it's implemented. But if your security posture changes at that point, you don't have enough time to pivot, and you'll most likely have to do some sort of modification or a total reimplementation. So our cloud engineers started testing and evaluating the Amazon AppStream. Since we already had Amazon Web Services presence and support for the last several years with our environment. We also looked at the scalability and performance of those systems. And so when you're looking at continuously, and I'm going to say continuously at possibly staff peak times, we may see about 5,000 to 6,000 users on at the same time. We do not anticipate all 30,000 employees connecting at the same time, but we were rough numbers based upon our current metrics that we have. We estimated about 5,000 users. We also looked at the endpoint management pieces of it, because we were looking at workstations or devices that were going to be unmanaged. They were going to be unmanaged at the locations of their homes or other places they may be operating. We looked at a BOID strategy, and in the event that we started bringing in devices, what that would look like. And then we had to look at our managed devices in a controlled environment for us. We've got iPads, we've got Chromebooks, and we have PCs. Our current population of devices is somewhere around 175,000 devices in environment, and we're buying, currently right now we bought another 35,000 with more plans to buy some more additional devices. And then finally, when you start looking at the funding model, which most of us have seen in education, those are pretty taxing when it comes to CapEx versus OpEx. And in our district in the past, we've been very flush with CapEx funds, but not very flush with OpEx funds. So when we started looking at this type of solution, there are large investments that you have to make in picking a VPN remote access solution. You've got to buy the hardware, you've got to buy the licensing, you've got to buy the support and maintenance contract all the time, versus an OpEx model, which is a pay-as-you-go. So for us, we were looking at something that we wanted to be able to pay for what we used, and something that we didn't have to negotiate any licensing contracts. We didn't want to have to go through quotes or do POs. We wanted more of a services contract, and as opposed to doing a large investment and then not realizing the utilization of that investment to the full extent. The other parts of that is our board, as well as our administration, wants better metrics around utilization and being able to identify students when they're connecting in and what, the amount of time that they're actually using the connectivity, some of our applications in the environment, whether they're in the cloud or on. So our final selection was AWS AppStream, because it solved a lot of these issues by being able to deploy a secure solution, something that was scalable in a matter of hours. We could make the look and feel of the application provisioning over the course of a few days. As it pertains to the safety of our staff, this was all built in their homes. So nobody had to come on site to do any work in collaboration with AWS.
All right, Scott. Wow, lot of really good information and considerations that I know once again are applicable to every one of our attendees. So, Chad, my question to you is: given that there was no time, there was very little planning, and even so, as we're looking at start of school, still not the the length of time you typically look at in putting something as complex as remote learning in place. What are some of the advantages of using cloud services and an application like AppStream to help in this very time-sensitive period?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, many people here probably have heard me talk a little bit before, and these 4 categories are something that we've been talking about for quite some time. So, I mean, I think Scott hit on a lot of them really well. You know, obviously there's the cost factors as pay as you go. There's the ability, you know, to cut down on your risk. When you think about just the moving parts that Scott described, it brought me back to my time as a CTO, thinking about what it would take to secure your own solution. And I know we're going to talk about security later, but one of the things about AWS Cloud and cloud in general is that we have to meet the security requirements of extremely stringent customers, and everybody gets those security tools. And so it's a great equalizer. And, you know, the other piece is, you mentioned it well, Lenny, is just equity. You know, there's one thing to have connectivity, which I know is a massive gap and something that we have to be very considerate of in K-12, but it's actually getting the material that you need to make sure that you can keep going. And then if you could go to the next slide, I think it's that innovate faster piece. So, you know, for many years, I've been telling this story and talking at conferences and all over the place about this idea that school districts can't afford to be slow. And I do feel like that happened to essentially 19,000 school districts all at once. You know, so, you know, I would make the comment that, well, it is great that cloud can help schools during this pandemic. In response to the pandemic, I'm moving really fast, but this is a good place to be when we're not in a pandemic. And, you know, I think back to my time as a chief technology officer or as a principal, as a customer of the technology department, thinking of the times that a teacher would come to me or a principal would come to me as a CTO and say, hey, I'd like to test this out. And it was like, well, I don't have a server. I don't have people to do that. I don't have any money. And I think, you know, one of the things that cloud allows you to do is really change to a completely new level the way IT can support student success. Because in the cloud, it's pay as you go. You go, sure, let's try out that new reading tool. But I tell you what, you know, if we're not getting good measurements out of it, then we can turn that off. Whereas before, you know, in the world that I lived in several years ago as a CTO, you know, that was a big investment, right? There's a big capital expense that you're making in that piece of software, and it took a lot of time. Well, a lot of times that teachable moment is gone. So, you know, I come at this from a teacher angle a lot, but I think getting yourself into this very agile posture is a really big deal for schools as you think about not just your response to COVID-19, but also how are we going to build resilient school districts in the future to where we can just say, oh, like we have to go remote learning. This is what we do. Bang, bang, bang. To your point, Lenny, and we're ready to go. And I think that's the longer term plan that, you know, we're really excited and have some frameworks to help schools get done. So.
Yeah, you know, my takeaway from the conversation I guess I'm listening to you and Scott talk is a remote learning strategy at best takes 2 to 3 years. We're 6 months into it and very rushed. So this is going to be a journey that we are going to be on, we being every school district in the country, for many, many years. And it's going to require agility, it's going to require flexibility and the ability to pivot and go 180 in the matter of a couple of days, but doing it in a manner that's reliable and still provides that safety and security for your staff. That's top of mind, and it's not going to go away for the next, at a minimum, year and a half. So I think it's important that we think about that as we start to look at our solutions. So, you know, we've talked about the different sides of the house. We have the business side, the operational, and then we have the instructional side. So Scott, can you talk to us about, from the operations, the business side, of a product like AppStream? What have you seen as the biggest advantages to moving to an application like this?
Yeah, so when I sit back and I take a look at what some of this enablement has done and it allowed us to start to move much quicker than what we've been able to do in the past, we have seen in this space a redistribution of the IT workload. So traditionally, when we had remote access solutions, you had to involve your networking team, your security team, and your end user support team. So your networking team had to make sure they had all the routes in place so that you could protect the organization. Your security team is the one that managed the remote access and the provisioning of people. Your end user support teams were going out and loading the client on devices. So a lot of work effort there. For us, now that we've got this remote access in place for AppStream, we've shifted that workload by consolidating and moving it into a cloud service delivery team. And so what we've been able to do is tie this in with Office 365. So this is essentially where they go into a landing portal of O365. And at that point, we've created an icon for them to click on called HIC Anywhere that takes them into the AppStream environment. So the look and feel of that is consistent with what we've promoted out there. And it reduced a lot of complexity and it increased the speed of implementation of a solution. If we traditionally were to load and provision all 30,000 employees, that would take several weeks to actually get that out there. With this solution, we were able to do it in a matter of days. The other part that was a big win inside the organization is that we had a lot of our administrators that needed access into the financial system or other academic applications that were thick client. So by being able to roll out AppStream, we were able to enable that. And in some of those applications, you have a Java client that launches that doesn't work well with other VPN solutions. Because this is containerized, this works just as if you were sitting inside your office without any additional software needed to be able to run it. So that was a real big win because we had a lot of our administrative staff that still needed to do processing of shopping carts. They still needed to do goods receipt. They needed to do pro card transactions, some of the mileage travel that they were doing. So that allowed them to be able to do that. The other part of this was we were able to start centralizing the management of those applications that we were rolling out. So we no longer had to do security updates or patches or application revisions or identify if we had conflicts of those applications running on the different multitudes of machines because that was all centralized within AppStream. This also allowed us to be device agnostic. So we did not have the ability, and as many as you probably experienced, computers flew off the shelves just like hand sanitizer. And literally being able to go and buy computer equipment, and if you wanted to buy, 1,000 or so, you were going to wait 6 to 8 weeks traditionally, but then as timelines moved out 8 to 12 weeks. I was on a call here recently on a group there, a couple school districts aren't going to see their computer equipment until January of 2021. And so what this allowed us to do is that the employees or even students they were able to use their own computers at home and in being able to access the applications without presenting any security risk for us. So just the management of that made it much more simplistic for us. And on top of that, it's just the security of the data in the application. So all of that was staying contained within the data center. None of that was leaving. So essentially what we're doing is we're just sending keystrokes to do the transactions. But we were able to keep that data in itself intact. And then we weren't exposing anything like our financial system or HR system out beyond the internet. So traditionally with those VPN solutions or WebSSL, there is that risk of exposing that. That limited our risk from being exposed in dealing with people that were in remote locations or anybody that may be operating as a bad actor or bad intention in trying to.
All right. Well, good information. Thanks. I think it's important we can't forget about the business side of education because if that's not operating efficiently, it can grind things to a halt. So, Chad, digital equity is a hot topic. I know we're trying to deal with getting devices in the hands of kids. We're dealing with do they have internet connectivity at home and how can we do that? but I think digital equity expands way beyond just a device and a connection. So how does an application like AppStream help address the digital equity concerns that are out there?
So, yeah, we wanted to, share a little bit about Council Bluffs Community School District. I know, Houston ISD, some of you in your mind are probably thinking, man, that's a really big school district. Council Bluffs is a little different model, about 10,000 kids, and we can probably put the link in the chat, but we've done a fireside chat with John from there that talks a little bit about their deployment. And one of the things that I thought he does a really good job in that fireside chat talking about is really just that access, access to tools. I've already mentioned it a little bit, getting outside of that traditional computer lab. The other thing that I think that was really interesting that they talked about was that I, as a former principal, I think about was just school real estate. In the age of social distancing, which I think we're going to be in, and as Lenny mentioned, is our new normal, one of the things we're seeing some of these customers do is, reclaim lab space to use in a different way. And while I think that's important during social distancing, I know that also can be critical for other programs that the schools want to build and get back that real estate. So appreciate it.
Yeah, the digital equity, there's so much more to it than just providing a device. And I said it in the beginning, this is about providing and making sure that the instructional experience is as close to what it is face-to-face it is for our kids who are going to be working remotely, and ensuring that we still get a year's growth for every one of our groups. All right, I'm going to end our session on the biggie, and that is cybersecurity. Scott, talk to us about cybersecurity, AppStream, the cloud, and what you're doing to leverage those products, and then what are you doing to mitigate the risk for every one of your students who are operating from home now?
Yeah, so for us, the biggest thing is what we've seen from a cybersecurity standpoint. A lot of you may be familiar with is that we can put a lot of the best security in place, and it costs quite a bit of money. But the moment the weakest link is found, then your entire infrastructure is possibly compromised, whether that's physically or from a data standpoint. And so this has been a very unprecedented time for us in the sense that the way that we've been able to work and operate, the organization has moved to a model where the expectation is if they were sitting in the office or sitting in a classroom, the expectation is those applications that they need the most and resources they need are available for them to be able to work in. And so getting a lot of that feedback right now from some teachers and some principals as recently as last night on how we can improve, that is really good in what we're hearing from them in just trying to make it easier for a teacher or a principal. So that presents quite a few security challenges for us in just managing a different type of workforce. In what we're going to be doing and moving into the fall session right now, what we're hearing, and keep in mind that it changes pretty frequently depending where you're looking at, whether it's the federal level, the state level, or the local level. Our intent is to work from a physical mode, but still offering remote learning. So with every employee still accessing it or potentially accessing it remotely, whether they are quarantined or happen to get COVID, being able to operate from their home presents certain vulnerabilities because you've got the lack of any sort of physical or technical security controls that you can put inside of an employee or student's home environment. And that's going to wrap around their routers, their Wi-Fi. It's going to increase the amount. And one of the things that we were concerned about as we see a lot of K-12 institutions getting compromised from a ransomware standpoint, that's our biggest concern. So any way for that to tunnel back in the environment presents a lot of risk for us. So this is one of the ways that we mitigated it by moving it to AppStream. The other part is security controls, where a lot of that time was spent on defining the user's job function, defining what type of device they had, what applications or data services they need, whether they were coming in from a geographic location, because we have people that tend to travel. And so when they're in Europe or when they're in the Mideast or when they're in Asia, the expectation is they still continue to work. And we have geo-fenced those countries because we get a lot of compromises from those countries or attacks that are coming in, so we mitigate that. This starts to open that up as well without having to provide a VPN solution, but more of a remote access solutions. And in just, in our environment alone, we have spent quite a bit around providing strong protection around the perimeter layer. But however, once you get an authenticated user that does come in, they're into the internal network. So the security controls aren't as strong. So when a employee or a student gets compromised with phishing, we're trusting that employee as if it was themselves. So that presented some other issues for us, and so sometimes we don't have the ability to control everything. So we do our best to shore up internally and follow the best practices, but we have seen where we are vulnerable in that environment. So having tighter security controls, that's what the remote access for AppStream offers us. And then we also have things like internet and content filtering that are happening through our content filter providers or our hotspot providers that are in the environment. One thing that I want to stress as well is that as you start to open up anywhere around remote access, that you continue to do assessments in the environment. And the smaller districts are just as susceptible to the same threats as larger districts. But with them, they have fewer resources. And in those districts, they tend to have the network guy is the systems guy, is the security guy. And so not enough resources in that environment to be able to do that. So one of the things that we do, as we're making changes in the environment, we're continuing to do our assessments around remote access to make sure that we've got the right security posture and risk mitigation in place. So as we begin to enable any new capabilities through AppStream or Office 365 or any other cloud-based or on-premise applications, we're bringing in third-party entities to do those assessments around our internal and external perimeter. We're doing a health check around our AWS environment just to make sure that our engineers didn't click the wrong button to enable some of this. And is it necessarily putting us at more risk than what we're doing? We're doing Office 365 health checks to make sure that we haven't introduced any other risk in the environment. So health checks or assessments, security assessments, once you begin to open up that remote access, highly encourage that you continue to do those if you're not doing them already.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Scott. Chad, what do you got around cybersecurity?
Well, you mentioned something in the very beginning of people, processes, and technology. And one of the things that I've seen in our customers that are really leveraging cloud in a meaningful way is when they don't spend as much time dealing with complicated infrastructure, they have a lot more time to deal with things like data governance, training, making sure that their processes are in place and that they're taking care of their people. I think that's one of the interesting byproducts that I've seen in my last 2.5 years as we've started to see more cloud in K-12. And I've already mentioned the other part. These services that we provide are already meet the most stringent government standards. So, we don't have time to get into it today, but when you think about FERPA, COPA, SIPA, and HIPAA, and all the acronyms, right? We have those covered, and we have blogs, quick reference guides, different artifacts that can help schools understand it. And then I do want to talk, just in general, if you go to the next slide around, our shared responsibility model for security. I think it's really important for customers to know as you start to think about cloud and AWS is, AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. So you can see the things there on the right. It's a good way to think about it. Our global infrastructure, compute, database, storage, networking, all the 175 plus services we have. And customers are really responsible for security in the cloud. Every service you launch, you pick where your data goes. You're the only person that can see that data. You still, have the operating system, the firewall configurations, many of the things, if not all the things that you have in your on-prem data center. So while the tools are really robust, and the transparency of what's happening, you know, in the cloud is there for you to see. You know, you as a customer still own that, and we give you all the tools and training to help you along the way. So
awesome. The one thing that I would add to this conversation around cybersecurity, Scott mentioned it, you know, you can spend $1 billion on your infrastructure, and all it takes is somebody clicking a wrong link, and you're exposed. So, you know, I think there has to be an element of awareness that's going on in your district. So what are you doing to heighten the end user awareness around this? And cybersecurity isn't just a technology issue. So as the leaders, who are you communicating to about what your current risk profile is? And it should be to the superintendent and ultimately to the school board, so that there's shared accountability in everybody understanding what your risk profile is. And if they're not comfortable with that, then that takes money to fix. But it's not solely on the shoulders of the IT department from a cybersecurity ownership perspective. So please keep that in mind. Think through, who are you working with to have shared accountability in the cybersecurity world. All right, gentlemen, lots of really good information. My head is overflowing with all the great information. What I want to do is just take a couple of minutes, Scott, Chad, couple of minutes, just give us some closing thoughts around this whole new normal we're living in, start a school, and how we can position ourselves as IT leaders to help our district be in a great spot.
I'll go ahead and just kind of chime in. So I was thinking about this part of it, and when you were on a previous slide about pushing change doesn't work, instead getting the organization ready for change. Inside our organization, they're more than ready for the change. And I've never seen the amount of change adoption that our organization is willing to take on and risk, just from the campus level all the way to administration. So we have the support to bring new technologies, innovative technologies in the environment, and our teachers are asking for it. They're asking for the integration components. They're asking for the data analytics. They're asking to make things more efficient and easier for them to do. And hearing from them, one of the things that comes to my mind is, as many of you may have known, this just doesn't magically happen. We have been on this journey with Amazon for the last 2 years, and while you may have some of your cloud engineers that may be skilled in the environment that can set up AppStream, to really take the most or get the most out of the cloud products or providers that are offering that, you really need some skilled resources or spend time upskilling the resources to become familiar and comfortable with the technology. If you're working from more of a greenfield approach, there's going to be a learning curve when you're introducing this into the environment of cloud services from AWS, and it's going to take some time to work through. But if you've got a staff that's willing to adopt it, they need to learn how to do the scaling. They need to learn how to forecast and manage some of the costs. They need to understand the differentiation between cloud services and how you integrate it into other products in the environment. And so even though for the deployment for us literally took a week, we were in cabinet talking at cabinet on a Monday, and then we were rolling this out on a Thursday to our user base, and a lot of good positive feedback that we received from that. But however, once you do get the people in place, it does give you the agility to help enable that digital transformation, especially when a crisis hits. Of something like this. We have been through a multitude of different crises, whether they are hurricanes or in our previous instances, we've had things like H1N1, not anywhere near the magnitude of what we've seen here. But what I've noticed is that every time that we are approached with a crisis of some sort, they're not cookie cutter by any means. You take a little bit from each one and then you adapt at that point. So this is how it enabled our organization to be able to move much more quicker to provide a solution for that. We've got some major projects. Like I mentioned before, we are turning over into a brand new student information system. And so because of that, if we didn't have the necessary skilled staff to do that, we would still be struggling with trying to provide training for our teachers remotely into that new system, or even our administrators or principals and some of our staff people. The other thing I just kind of wanted to mention, because cost, it kind of gives a little cost scenario in what we're doing here, to kind of give you an idea of what we were looking at. When we started looking at some of our costs for remote access, just to do something in one of our sub-environments where we do VDI, we're spending about $66 per user per month. What we've been able to measure from AppStream, we're spending about $3 per user per month. So very big, huge cost savings, and we're able to measure that utilization there as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Chad, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think I've thrown a slide in there that I've been thinking a lot lately about, which is, cloud is really a transformational opportunity with a well-worn path. And so I think a lot of times when we, as a K-12 CTO, Director of Technology, we kind of think of cloud as very overwhelming. But there's been a lot of schools go ahead of you, just like Scott just mentioned. There's lots of customers, and we use those customer stories to inform us how to help you. And nobody's environment is the same. Everybody's environment is different, and so we have methodologies to help really understand and guide you. And so when I think about your cloud transformation, it doesn't have to be this big, massive migration. In fact, I'm sure Scott would tell you, we started really small, and so with some really small services, and grew the team, trained the team, and moved there. So let your small migrations inform your medium migrations, inform your large migrations, and just know that we're here to partner with you, and we have partners. We have a lot of different directions we can go to get the work done. So I'll stop there because I know we ran a little bit long, but so we can get into Q&A for a few minutes.
Yeah, great. Thanks, gentlemen. Great information. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Scott, especially you, getting ready for start of school. Kurt, we have just a few minutes for some questions, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lenny. And thanks to Chad and Scott. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Yes, a couple reminders to our audience. We did get some questions about accessing the archive recording of the slides, and yes, we'll be in touch with those afterwards, so you'll be able to go back over it. I know Scott and Lenny and Chad had a lot of material to go over in a short amount of time there, so you'll be able to go back over it if you need to. If you do have a question, please feel free, enter it in the Q&A, bottom right-hand corner there. We'll get to as many as we can here, just a couple minutes left. Several questions about cybersecurity. Obviously, that's top of mind for a lot of folks now, and I think, Scott, I think you mentioned this and how you address this, but someone asked about phishing in particular. How do you ensure employee and student credentials have not been phished or are being used by criminals or bad actors around the world? Scott, how do you address that?
Yeah, so to be real brief, we do have that inside of our organization where accounts do get phished. One of the things that we are doing right now is we're starting to roll out multi-factor authentication through Office 365 as part of that platform. So right off the bat, if you are compromised, then you're automatically enrolled into that. So that is not going to be something that we negotiate with at this moment in time. But right now we're rolling out beginning to roll out a communication plan for the rest of the organization. So it's still being formalized, but we're going to use MFA from Office 365 to be able to do that.
Okay, sure. And actually, that's a great lead-in, Scott. Right at the end there, we were talking about end-user awareness as that important aspect of cybersecurity. Is that, I think you were alluding to that, right, Scott, your communication plan for your end users?
Yeah, for the MFA. And as part of our organization, there's a state mandate. It's called House Bill 3834 from the state of Texas that requires all public institutions to train their employees through security awareness. And so we do provide that annually every year for our employees. And we are certified by the state to be able to share our content and curriculum out with what we do. So that's already part of our annual process for compliance, and it's a mandatory requirement.
Okay, sure. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we have reached the top of the hour here, so I just want to be respectful of everybody's time and wrap things up here. Before I do, just want to draw attention to our next webinar, and you probably have seen promotions for this. This is coming up next week. Building the business case, how districts can save money, stay flexible, and innovate during times of uncertainty. And so keep an eye out for that, and we hope you can join us for that next week as we continue this conversation in these unprecedented times as we're adapting to the new environment, the new normal here for teaching and learning. So thanks to our speakers once again, Scott, Lenny, and Chad. Thanks so much for joining us here today. And again, a big thank you to our sponsor for today, Amazon Web Services. And to everyone in our audience, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found our presentation informative and useful. Producing events like this one is just part of our mission here at DA to inform school district leaders like you about the latest news and trends in K-12 management. You'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we discussed here in the pages of our print magazine, as well as our digital edition and website, through additional webinars like this one, and through our various email newsletters, which you can sign up for right from our website. And as I mentioned before, for those of you who would like to share the content of this presentation with your colleagues, or if you want to go back over it at your own pace, you can access the archive recording at the URL on your screen. And again, everyone will be getting a follow-up email with links to where you can find the recording, as well as the slides. So you can go back over them at your own pace or share with anyone on your team at your district. So that is it for today's event. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your summer. On behalf of all of us here at District Administration, I'm Kurt Ozdurley. Goodbye everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us today.